We're talking right now to Kelsey Johnson of iPolitics. She's also editor of The Sprout. Hey, Kelsey, how's it going?
Not too bad. How are you, Shaun?
I'm doing good. Lots of stuff to talk about. What's going on in Ottawa? Hey, before we go any further, though, you're making a big move.
Yes, I did get a new job. I'm going to start working for Reuters, which is going to be a little bit of a shift, but I'm excited. But I'm also going to miss ag and everything else. So I'm going to hope to try and keep covering ag as much as I can in my new job, as I also learn the exciting world that is Statistics Canada.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
We'll drag you back in here, hopefully, and talk about things that are going on in the economic sphere. It's always interesting and has definitely impacts on the agricultural industry. Absolutely. Okay. Hey, let's start off with, a lot of people have focused throughout the time that Trump and Trudeau have both been leaders of their respective countries. What is their relationship? In the last 10 days, we have seen a lot of communication back. It seems a heightened amount of communication between Ottawa and Washington, D.C. What's been going on here? What's the reason for it?
Well, I think that the whole world is concerned about the escalating trade war that is happening between the United States and China. The U.S. announced on Friday that it had increased its tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. And China has said it will retaliate as of June 1st and put more tariffs on $60 billion worth of goods. And so this, of course, has caused a lot of concern within the marketplace. There's also concern about what products are going to get hit with tariffs next. A lot of ag products have been on the list. And it also comes as many countries, Canada not excluded, are running into issues with China of their own. And so the Prime Minister actually called U.S. President Donald Trump twice last week, on Thursday before the tariffs came into effect, and then Friday after they did. And then he also spoke with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence yesterday, and all three of those calls focused on China, including the two Canadians that are still detained by authorities in China, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And there has been a broader push the last couple of weeks to try and get the Americans to help us on the China front. It doesn't seem to be much engagement from the Americans at this point. There was one senator who spoke out last week, but there's definitely, I would say, evidence that Ottawa is perhaps adjusting their playbook when it comes to China and the ongoing issues, both diplomatically and trade related, that they have.
Yeah, I think this is a new reality for this country. Its cover in the past has always been that the U.S. has been there to really be its sidekick, or we've been a sidekick to the U.S. Let's not mistake that. But there's been a very solid relationship and kind of diplomatically really on the same page. In this case, Canada's kind of lost its cover and having a hard time finding a strategy to find a solution for a big-time tiff with a global economic power like China. And if it's not going to get help from the U.S. on solving some of these issues with pork and canola and beef breeds, it's hard to be super optimistic, don't you think, that we're gonna find resolution really quick here?
Well, I don't want to speculate on what may or may not happen. What I would say is that some of the disputes that Canada has had have been ongoing for several months now, and they have not been resolved. The Chinese are still contemplating Canada's request for a scientific delegation on canola. There's been no evidence presented as to Beijing's pest concerns. The two Canadians detained remain in Chinese detention. Another two Canadians remain on death row. And Ottawa, the federal government has been trying to keep this out of political circles, and they've been trying to focus on the science. But I would suggest that given the increase in calls between Washington and Ottawa, and the increased use of alternative global meetings to discuss the canola issue and other issues with China, that Ottawa may be revising its playbook a bit.
Yeah, okay. So last Friday, the Prime Minister is in Edmonton, had some interesting thoughts, maybe a bit of a change in the way they're discussing this canola dispute.
Mm-hmm. So the Prime Minister was asked about whether, about the trade dispute with China on canola. Alberta is the second largest producing canola province in the country. It's definitely a big concern out there. He was also asked whether he'd take the matter to the WTO. And what was interesting was that the Prime Minister appeared to directly tie Canada's canola dispute with China to the broader global fight that is happening between two of the world's largest economies, that being the United States and China. To my knowledge, this is the first time that the Prime Minister has really come forward and tied Canada's woes to the broader political and trade environment. Up until that point, it had been very much a discussion about the science. And those conversations remain ongoing. Canada continues to ask for permission to send delegation, but it was interesting for the Prime Minister to suggest that perhaps Canada is being used as a pawn in this broader chess match that is going on.
And with the U.S. at this point really not motivated to help Canada, and China definitely looking down upon Canada, being caught in the middle in a very squishy sandwich is kind of the place that we're resting here right now. Chrystia Freeland, Foreign Affairs Minister, is in Washington, D.C. today. People believe that it is renewed negotiations on what to do with these Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs. The U.S. seeking quotas. Canada saying in the past has said no, just remove the tariffs like you originally had promised. This is a big part of what happens going forward with the USMCA ratification in the U.S. and quite frankly, in Canada, because my understanding is Canada is still holding firm they will not ratify until those tariffs are lifted. Is that still correct?
Yep, that is still the line that's coming from Ottawa. That was the line that was delivered during a meeting between Minister of Agriculture Marie-Claude Bibeau and U.S. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue when they met on the sidelines of the G20 Agriculture Ministers meeting in Japan. Bibeau said that Canada is looking forward to implementing the USMCA, but they are not willing to do that while the steel and aluminum tariffs are in place. And if you look at the parliamentary calendar, we're ticking down into our last week here before the election is called. And there remains ongoing concern within the U.S. Congress about USMCA. Senator Chuck Grassley basically wrote an op-ed that said, we're not doing this until you get rid of the steel and aluminum tariffs. So that is definitely an issue of concern for the Canadian government, and we'll see what happens for the USMCA. But at this point, it remains stalled, and there's no evidence that Canada is looking to implement or ratify that deal quickly with the tariffs still in place.
Yeah, it's definitely a time where farm groups have spent a good portion of the winter here trying to lobby people on both sides of the border. We're seeing farm groups lobbying for, hey, we need trade, whether that's between the U.S. and Canada or that's with foreign partners. And it's in this rising tariff, less free trade environment. Agriculture's got a lot of concerns, and it's not just the commodity markets. It's just the ability to do business, I think, is a good way to. There's a lot of concern out there.
Mm-hmm. No, the agriculture is always one of the first sectors to be hit when you have a trade war that's going on and trade disputes that happen, because most agricultural products are perishable, and so they're easy to hit. And the dispute may have nothing to do with, it may have started with nothing to do with agriculture, but generally speaking, retaliatory lists have ag products on them, and that's definitely what's being shown within the U.S.-China context. And I think there is an acknowledgement from the Trump administration in a maybe an indirect way that farmers are being affected by the ongoing battle. They've already given $12 billion worth of aid, and the U.S. president promised another $15 billion in aid this week, and is also musing about purchasing American product and then using it as international food aid. So there's definitely questions there. Canadian grain groups have already come out and said, look, the federal government here in Ottawa needs to do more to support farmers, especially given U.S. farmers seem to be getting quite a bit of assistance from their government. And there's also concern about what other products could be caught up if China chooses to escalate their dispute further. If you look at the areas that China has listed so-called administrative concerns, you have canola, of course, but then you've got 2 pork plants that have lost their export permits because of labeling issues, allegedly. You have 2 livestock genetics companies who haven't been able to get their export permits renewed despite outstanding contracts. And so you have to wonder, the ag industry is wondering, is this going to escalate further, and what happens if it does, and whether other products could be affected. The Canadian government, of course, is trying not to escalate that, and they're insisting that some of these issues are just administrative and are not tied to the current context. But there's no question that there's a lot of uncertainty within the farm community on both sides of the border as this develops. Hey,
a few seconds left here. So with the U.S. subsidy payment that is potentially coming out, a second round of MFP payments, are we potentially going to see an ad hoc program, do you think, in Canada? Will pressure mount during an election year for that to happen, or are they going to stick to their, hey, we got agri-stability?
I think there's already mounting pressure for changes to agri-stability. That's been a long ask for a number of years, ever since the margins got cut in 2012 from 85 to 70. And I think the fact that the federal government has already extended the enrollment deadline for agri-stability for an additional 2 months signals that is a program that people are looking at. So I don't expect conversations around whether agri-stability is doing what it's supposed to be doing to stop. Whether the conversation evolves into a broader ad hoc program, we'll have to see. But there is definitely a recognition in Ottawa, I would say, about the potential implications of trade disputes. They've increased the advance payments program loan, although there's demands now that the interest use portion, the $500,000 that they've given to canola growers, should be granted to everybody, because soybean prices aren't great either, for instance. So I don't think you'll stop seeing conversations about boosting business risk management as groups go forward. But we'll see what happens. Who knows?
That is Kelsey Johnson with iPolitics, and as of next week with Reuters. Hey, Kelsey, thanks a lot.
Thank you.